this past year, what have been your overall thoughts and takeaways of 2021?
Well, it's been a very challenging year. It began with the attack on the Capitol, the insurgency on January 6th, a really deep scar that continues on our democracy and one that we have to overcome, get to the bottom of it, and then move forward. With the happy development of the inauguration of President Biden and Vice President Harris that my wife and I attended, very hopeful about where we headed forward in the year. The progress made with the American Rescue Plan to get us moving forward, I think it worked. I think it helped so many people avoid hardship and distress. But then the continuing problems that we've had both legislatively and passing the child care and higher education and public education legislation that's embodied in Build Back Better, still not accomplished, much to do. And with all of us, of course, concerned about this latest wave with Omicron and how it may affect our families, our lives, and our future.
So let's start with the pandemic and kind of the rise of Omicron in the past few weeks, month, I guess. Where do you see the federal government's role continuing on during the pandemic?
Well, I think the president's effort to get out rapid tests is really important, and to try to provide some backup staff for our healthcare facilities. We really have had heroes at our hospitals and other healthcare facilities, and they're being overtaxed by those who refuse to get vaccinated. I think that Omicron really grows out of the fact that too many people won't get vaccinated and too many people can't get vaccinated. The distribution of these vaccines around the world has been inadequate, and the refusal of people to immunize here in the United States creates an environment for the spread of more and more variants. So I'm concerned about Omicron, but I'm also concerned about whatever may come next if we can't get more people here and abroad immunized.
Going into 2022, what can the federal government do to encourage more people to get immunized or to protect the American public from whether it's Omicron or another variant that pops up in 3-4 months?
Well, we've seen how directives in the United States military have worked to get people immunized. We've seen how directives from some private companies like Delta Airlines have worked. We need more people immunized to protect all of us. I'd like to see the president declare you can't get on an airplane unless you show proof of immunization. I think there's some other steps like that. We need to keep encouraging, certainly, but simply encouragement has been insufficient to get us to the level of immunity that we need. More services, but more willingness to apply some incentives that are not only positive, but some that are negative, to say if you don't immunize, you don't have a right to endanger the health of your neighbors. You pay some penalty for it.
We heard President Biden say, I believe it was this week, his underlying theme of we're not going back to March 2020. When this pandemic first happened, there were all these shutdowns. What's going to be different next year, at least from your perspective, in the House of Representatives?
Well, I certainly don't want us to go back to March 2020, and I don't think anyone else does. We want to keep our schools open and our businesses open. But the future remains uncertain about the impact of Omicron. It appears to be going up quickly, but also to level off and decline based on experience in other countries. I hope that happens and we can return to whatever was almost normality that we had before Omicron hit the scene. In the House, our work lies ahead with regard to child care legislation, the child care tax credit, the work that I've done on educational opportunity for students from preschool to post-grad, including my tax-free Pell proposal, a variety of other measures. I, of course, would continue to put at the top of the agenda voting rights and overcoming the voter suppression that has occurred in Texas and elsewhere. On so many of these, we cannot move forward unless we have cooperation from Senator Manchin and the Senate. was extremely troubling after months of weakening the Build Back Better bill to meet his concerns, that he came up and became something of the Grinch that stole Christmas, at least for the people that were counting on a tax cut in January in the form of the child tax credit and many other helpful provisions in that bill. But some way, despite our extreme dissatisfaction with him, we've got to find a way to narrow and focus on some measures that can pass, and hopefully to encourage him to place at the top of the agenda voting rights protection and guarantees. It's clear that the kind of suppression that occurred in Texas can hurt turnout and deny people the right to vote. We need the federal government to put a stop to that.
Speaking of Build Back Better, where do you see that going now? I mean, like you said, Senator Manchin played a pretty big role in stopping that legislation recently. How do you move forward?
Well, he has vacillated a good bit in recent days as to exactly what he's for and what he's against. He seems to have been against just about everything in the bill at one point or the other. I, as you know, favor paying for anything we do with reference to Build Back Better. He seems to be supportive of pre-K, pre-kindergarten education, which I think is really important to expand here in Texas. To be supportive of at least some modest measures to deal with the climate crisis, though he's been an obstacle to doing much more than we need to have happen there. And the area that I'm particularly interested in as Health Subcommittee Chair, expanding access and the affordability of the Obamacare marketplace. It's unclear to me at this point whether the provision that I have that is designed to provide access to a family physician for up to 2 million Texans denied that by Governor Abbott's rejection of Medicaid expansion, whether that's within the purview of what Senator Manchin says he supports. But I'll be back there working hard to try to get it included, as well as to try to preserve the expansion of student financial assistance and my no tax Pell Grant proposal that is incorporated in the House version of Build Back Better. It's a matter of basically getting all the progress we can get when we can get it, and knowing that so many people are counting on us, even if we cannot secure all of the protection that we had hoped would be adopted in the Build Back Better bill from the House.
We've seen a lot of partisanship over the past year and beyond as well, but talk to me a little bit about the need to mend those bridges.
Well, there is a need to mend those bridges, certainly with reference to these pandemics that don't discriminate according to party affiliation. I will say that the barriers are great because when you have people that engage in an armed attack on the presidency, on the democracy, when you have almost all Texas Republicans in Congress refusing to accept the results of the last election, you have real peril for our democracy. And I think it is a very real threat that comes from those who contemplate the use of violence and who refuse to accept the results of an election and think the only election that is fair is one that they win. That's not the way democracy can or should work. At the same time, I'll keep looking for some areas of bipartisan progress. I've just introduced a bill that I think is important in this pandemic to expand and extend telehealth services so people can use their computer to reach their healthcare provider. And my lead co-sponsor is Daryl Nunes, the fellow who's leaving Congress to go work for Trump. And we have good bipartisan support for it. I'll be looking for other areas like that where we can make modest gains with some Republicans. The big challenge we face is that any Republican who's too reasonable and joins too many Democratic bills is at threat of being declared a traitor within his own party. We saw that to those who voted simply to put more money in Texas, $30 billion more money for transportation here and other billions around the country. The 12 House Republicans, none from Texas, who joined us to pass that bill, were declared traitors in their own party. So I see many barriers and some modest opportunities to make partisan measures go behind and to build that bridge to which you referred. But the biggest threat is the one to democratic governance in the future And I hope we'll find a few Republicans like Liz Cheney who have the courage to speak out in support of that.
Over the past year, what do you think has been the best, maybe that's not the best word, the most important legislation?
Well, I think probably the American Rescue Plan. That will mean significant monies right here in Austin through our city and county government to address the homelessness challenge. It got vaccines out there and I think saved many lives. It provided monies for our public educational institutions. University of Texas, though it applied to ACC, Houston-Tillotson, and San Ed's as well, has provided millions of dollars in student debt relief as a result of the American Rescue Plan. I think our messaging on it has been very poor, and many people don't recognize all the many aspects of it and how much it has helped to turn our country around. But I think it really worked.
And what do you think has been the most important legislation that you've been a part of?
Well, I think that bill, because it's been not only that piece of legislation, but the follow-up to try to limit the diversion of the public education money for our schools that Governor Abbott has insisted upon, to try to get as much of that money to the schools as possible. And then I think the work that I've done in healthcare in Build Back Better, if it can eventually be adopted, my top priority has been to see that those 2 million Texans who have not had access to a family physician through the Affordable Care Act get it. I think in a pandemic, we all have something at stake when some neighbors are fearful that they can't pay to go to a doctor and therefore don't get the protection that they need in a pandemic. But just in terms of basic human fairness, I think every American should have a right to health care, and this measure that I've worked on will help achieve that, as well as the measure that I worked on to try to extend dental, hearing, and vision to Medicare. We got hearing in Build Back Better because of Joe Manchin would only agree to that. I hope we can continue that. And then just generally in the educational opportunity area, I don't want to see any financial barriers to those young people who are willing to get higher education. And we have too many, and I'm going to continue working in that area.
And looking into 2022, what are you most looking forward to?
Well, I'm really fortunate in terms of family and friends here in Austin that we've stayed well. And so I look forward to a healthy 2022, but I look forward to being back in the legislative work in Washington because there's much work to be done. And I hope I will continue to enjoy support of my neighbors here in Austin to do that, to continue to make their priorities my priorities in Washington.
All right. Thank you very much, Congressman. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.